In this short podcast, I'm going to quickly give you an overview of the effects of Gorbachev's reforms on Eastern Europe, excluding for this time what happens in Germany and Berlin in particular. So, what Gorbachev does in 1988, moving into 1989, is that he announces that communist ideology, will no longer play a major role in international affairs and in Soviet foreign affairs. And that's quite important, because if you think back to the 1940s and 50s, with the creation of Cominform and Comecon, underpinning all that is the belief in socialism and communism and the desire to spread that ideology around the world. Now, what Gorbachev is saying in 1988-89 is that that's no longer the primary drive for foreign affairs. So it means, for example, now that the Soviet Union is looking to do trade deals perhaps with more with capitalist countries than perhaps with its former allies in, for example, the Eastern Bloc. Gorbachev is also keen for the policies of reform in Glasnost and Perestroika, and we look at those in an earlier podcast when we look at Mikhail Gorbachev, that they should be extended to the countries of Eastern Europe. As a reminder, Eastern Europe, Poland, East Germany, Romania, Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And so he is not going to stand in the way of the reform happening in those countries. And then he also begins withdrawing Soviet troops. The Red Army begin pulling out of Eastern Europe, primarily to save money. And Gorbachev is well aware of the financial burden of maintaining or garrisoning large soldiers in Eastern Bloc, in this communist Eastern Europe. Now, his intentions, it may seem silly, but I don't think Gorbachev's primary intentions at this time was to loosen control of communist Eastern Europe. But once these reforms kick in, things begin unravelling very quickly. Surprise, surprise. And the first country you can look at is Hungary. In the spring of 1989, they're announcing free elections. And in the summer of that year, there is a new constitution, a new democratic constitution unveiled. And Gorbachev does nothing to stop this. And so I think Hungary is one of the first countries to kind of move away from communism. You need to think back to the days of Nagy in 1956. And for the first time we see in Hungary at this time is a public outpouring of grief over the Hungarian uprising 34 years later. And a memorial and a funeral is held for some of the high-ranking politicians in public, and it's televised in Hungary. And that was a very important moment for the Hungarian people. Imre Nagy himself is buried properly. The same happens in Czechoslovakia, where the Prague Spring took place in 1968. And in November of 1989, there is popular protest on the street, which leads to the overthrow of the Czechoslovakian communist government there. And that is known as the Velvet Revolution, because no blood was spilt. And also then in Poland, traditionally one of the most hardline of all communist states, in June 1989 there are free elections held, and the communist government is heavily defeated in those elections. So the year of 1989 is the year when communism begins to unravel in Eastern Europe. There is one exception. In December 1989, Romania has a very bloody overthrow, where their leader, a man called Nicolae Ceausescu, is booed when he goes to deliver a speech from the balcony of his presidential palace. He's booed off by a large crowd. He's chased away, captured and executed, and then we see some quite violent struggles on the streets of Bucharest, which is the capital of Romania, and the communist government there is actually violently put down. But Romania is the exception. What we see in the other countries is actually a peaceful transition away from communism into Eastern Europe. And that really begins to spell the end for communism all over that part of Europe. And Gorbachev is virtually powerless to make any impact on this, because of his removal of the Red Army from Eastern Europe. And also, he would be a little hypocritical. He's trying to introduce reforms in his own country. If he's to step in now and stop reforms taking place in Eastern Europe, that would just be contrary to what he was about as a politician. So there we have it. And the next podcast will be about the events in East Germany and the collapse of the Berlin Wall.